In this edition of the Red and Blue Political Roundup, top Republicans are reportedly sounding the alarm over November's midterm elections. According to the New York Times, Office of Management and Budget Director Mick Mulvaney suggested Republicans would fare better in midterm elections if President Trump wasn't dominating the political conversation. The Times also reports Mulvaney and RNC Chair Ronna Romney McDaniel were concerned that Republican Senator Ted Cruz could lose his seat because he is not seen as likable. Joining me from Washington is Ryan Grim. He's the D.C. bureau chief for The Intercept. All right, Ryan, how concerned are Republicans about Texas, as well as other states the president carried in 2016?
Well, so in Texas, they believe that they can roll out tens of millions of dollars worth of negative ads on Beto O'Rourke. And, you know, because he's about half of Texans haven't yet heard of him, they think that they can bury him under that avalanche. But they also know that they don't know whether that still works. You know, at some point, the tens of millions of dollars of television ads to bury your opponent will stop working. The question is, you know, what election cycle is that? And if it's going to break on any wheel, you know, for Republicans, it might as well be Ted Cruz. As Mulvaney said, he's not likable. You know, he's the guy who Lindsey Graham said of him, you know, I like Ted Cruz more than any of my colleagues, and I hate Ted Cruz. You know, this is what the people who like him say about him. And he's up against this charismatic challenger who's compared to Robert Kennedy, and it must be just killing Ted Cruz. Beto has challenged him to debates in Spanish to kind of troll him because Ted Cruz doesn't really speak decent Spanish, and so Cruz has had to decline those. So, you know, they're scared. Yes, they're definitely nervous.
It'll be interesting to see how that particular race plays out. Well, over the weekend, President Trump tweeted that Republicans, quote, are doing really well with the Senate midterms. He did not tweet about the House. So is that a sign that Republicans are preparing to lose control of the House?
Yes, it is. You know, Trump is good at adjusting his boasts so that they're, you know, at least he can link them to something remotely true. And so, yeah, so if even Trump now is saying, okay, well, let's focus instead on the Senate. You know, the way that he was saying, look, things aren't bad for us. You know, we've won all of our special elections. Meanwhile, these were, you know, 20 and 30-point Republican districts that they were winning by 1 or 2 points. And here's the problem that Trump has created for himself and for his party. By lying this entire time and saying that there's a red wave coming, Republicans are going to, you know, storm through, and, you know, we're going to make big gains in both the House and the Senate. Don't believe the polls. Polls are fake news. A lot of his voters are kind of tuned out to these alarm bells that you've said Republican leaders are ringing. And so they're like, Trump says we're fine. Don't worry about it. And now he's saying, hey, we're fine in the Senate. So, you know, everywhere he goes, he kind of puts more gasoline on fires that are already going.
Yeah, I imagine some Republican candidates would not want to hear him talk about these things in such confident terms, because the thought might be that the base would be depressed by that, the turning out, you know,
right,
not coming out.
You know, right, but not wanting to hear Trump is not a wish that anyone gets fulfilled in this election cycle.
That's right. The president obviously always makes it a point to make his voice heard. Well, let's talk about the Democrats. How are Democrats preparing for the eventuality that they might take back control of the House and even the Senate?
Well, a couple of different ways. You know, they're prepping a legislative agenda, which they expect that President Trump would veto if it even managed to get through a presumably Republican-controlled Senate. And then, you know, they're also looking, you know, to dust off a lot of the subpoena requests that they have sent to the chairman of the committees. Once they're the chairman, they'll have their own subpoena power. Bizarrely, the would-be House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, has said that if Democrats retake the House, they will re-implement what's called PAYGO, you know, which Republicans waived in order to pass their huge tax cuts and their increases in military spending. That means for everything positive that Congress would do. Every dollar in social spending, they'd cut from somewhere else or raise taxes from somewhere else. You know, when the tax cut was passed, Democrats around the country said, well, this is terrible, but at least the one benefit from this is that we can now get rid of this silly deficit hysteria. And when we get into power, we can enact, a bold progressive agenda. Before they're even in power, Nancy Pelosi has said, no, actually, we're not going to do that. Anything we do, we're going to cut your social spending or we're going to raise your taxes instead.
Interesting. Let's talk about Florida. Congressman Ron DeSantis is resigning from Congress to focus on his campaign for governor of Florida. A new Quinnipiac University poll has him trailing Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum by 3 percentage points. How close of a race do you expect this to be?
Very close. Gillum is a dynamic personality. He's somebody who showed that he can bring new people out to the polls in the primary, and if he can do that again in the general, combined with a big blue wave, there has to be a surge in Democratic turnout for Democrats to overcome the structural problems that they have in Florida. He could certainly do it. Each base is now getting its wish. Each base has always said, stop running to the middle, stop being centrist. If you run somebody who's unapologetically progressive or unapologetically a Trump backer, that's how you inspire people. But in a year when Trump people are not inspired, but Democrats are, Gillum might be the better positioned of the two to capitalize on that theory.
Widening out a bit here, New Jersey Senator Cory Booker is reportedly sending staff to Iowa. He will be also the featured speaker at the Iowa Democrats' Fall Gala. He took center stage, of course, during last week's confirmation hearings for Judge Brett Kavanaugh. Do you think, Ryan, that Senator Booker is perhaps starting to emerge as somewhat of the party favorite to take on President Trump? Obviously, it's early yet, but that moment in that confirmation hearing is something that some folks are pointing to.
No, I certainly wouldn't call him the party favorite at this point, but it's also an interesting question of what we mean by, quote unquote, the party. Are we talking about, the few top leaders in the party? Are we talking about the kind of Washington establishment? Are we talking about, grassroots voters who come out in primaries? Among those, I wouldn't call him the front runner among any of those, but certainly somebody who's in the hunt. This is a race that could be one of attrition, and if he can, outlast a lot of people that have similarly kind of liberal to centrist politics with him, and then wind up in a one-on-one race with somebody like an Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders to his left, then that's probably his best shot.
Well, how does his strategy compare to maybe other Democrats who are avoiding campaigning in Iowa?
He's being, I guess, the most aggressive about it, but the others are being, fairly open about their intentions, even if they're not sending staff yet to Iowa. They're visiting, and they're doing other things that are clearly telegraphing that they're interested in the race. I guess there's something. There's something nauseating to think that we're already getting into another presidential election, and we're going to then be following it for 2+ years now, when we haven't even gotten through the midterms. But at the same time, I guess it's some refreshing honesty from politicians, ambitious politicians, to say, look, yes, this is what I want.
All right, 2020, not quite that far off, Ryan Grim. Ryan, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You got it.